And first of all, very quickly, I would like to associate myself with the really outstanding opening statements made by Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy, which I think were two of the finest opening statements I've heard in my 30 years in Congress, and express my views completely. Let me also say, while Mr. Strzok will stubbornly not admit what almost everyone else knows is extreme bias, I find it amazing that he can sit here and say that he was not biased in a way that clearly colored and affected his investigations. And if you don't agree with that, I want to read the words from Mr. Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Justice Department, who wrote that the Clinton investigation, quote, was the way it was conducted, quote, was inconsistent with typical investigative strategy and gave rise to accusations of bias and preferential treatment, unquote. Then I would guess that Mr. Strzok knows Chris Swecker, who spent 24 years with the FBI and retired as the head of all the FBI criminal investigations. And Mr. Swecker wrote, he said, the IG report presents jarring evidence of political bias by the FBI against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, but fails to add it all up to come to the inevitable conclusion that political bias was there. This is like saying 1 + 1 = 0. Mr. Strzok, do you have any reason to think that Mr. Horowitz or Mr. Swecker have some sort of bias or animosity toward you?
Sir, I disagree with Mr. Swecker's conclusions. I can't speak to Mr. Swecker's motivations of bias whatsoever, and I know of no bias by the Inspector General.
Also, Cheryl Atkinson, a columnist for one of the Capitol Hill newspapers, wrote this, quote, the earth-shattering finding on Strzok by the Inspector General confirms a citizenry's worst fears. A high-ranking government intel official allegedly conspired to affect the outcome of a U.S. presidential election. Let me ask you this, Mr. Strzok. You know that judges who have even minimal bias are required to recuse themselves from a case. Do you think that FBI agents have some sort of that they're special people who shouldn't be held the same high standards that judges are in deciding where to recuse themselves?
Sir, I would absolutely say that FBI agents, judges, all are expected that whatever their personal beliefs, that they set those beliefs aside in their pursuit of the truth or their application of the law.
So you don't believe that you were entitled to a lower standard
I believe
and use that?
I believe I'm held to the highest standard and that I abided by that.
But you told Chairman Goodlatte that you did not think you should have recused yourself in this case.
Sir, I'd say that's entirely consistent. I believe that all of my personal opinions were never taken into account in anything that I did in an official act. I think that was appropriate. I think that is in keeping with the highest standards of the FBI.
Well, I think that since both the Clinton and Trump investigations had and have such tremendous political ramifications, I think the ethical, fair, just, and proper thing would have been for you to recuse yourself and move on to other work. There were many other cases that you could have worked on that you had never expressed any bias, were there not? There were all kinds of cases.
Sir, I completely disagree with you. I don't think it would have been either necessary or required for me to recuse. I think every day with the Clinton investigation, with the Russian influence investigation, with the thousands of other investigations, when I walked in the door, the entirety of my action was dedicated to pursuing the facts, wherever they lie.
You know that many times judges have defendants appear before them who, after they've been found guilty, they apologize, say they're sorry, but trying to get probation. And yet many times people think those apologies are said more in hopes of getting probation and in regret that they have been caught rather than in sincere apology. Do you feel that you should apologize in any way to the American people for the things that you have expressed, this extreme bias that you expressed? Do you have any regret as to calling Trump supporters saying that they smelled and things of that nature?
Sir, I think I expressed a couple of things. One, I don't agree with your characterization of my views as bias. I think what I clearly articulated, and I can understand those concerns, and I hope when you heard me in my opening statement, when I talked about my regret to the people, the harm and the hurt to the people that I love and my family, when I talked to the way that these texts have been used against the FBI, when I responded to questions about using a turn of phrase about, smelling when I should have said hearing or seeing or whatever the case may be, that yes, those were not intended as direct animus towards any set of people. And I hope people understand that I do sincerely regret that. So I've said
time of
that.
the gentleman
I say it
has
again,
expired.
And I hope you hear that.
The chair recognizes